On the evening of the 11th of May 2010, Afriqiyah Airways Flight 771 departs from Johannesburg, South Africa for a flight to Tripoli, Libya. On board are 93 passengers and 11 crew members. Among the passengers are 71 Dutch nationals with an onward connecting flight to Amsterdam, the Netherlands. The aircraft operating Flight 771 is an Airbus A330-200 manufactured in 2009. It was delivered to Afriqiyah Airways in September 2009 and it has approximately 1,600 hours of total flight time and about 420 takeoff and landing cycles. The aircraft is less than a year old. There are 3 pilots in the cockpit, a co-pilot who is the pilot flying in the right seat, the captain in the left seat and a relief pilot for this long flight. The captain is 57-year-old Youssef Bashir Al-Said. He was hired by Afriqiyah Airways in 2007 and he has 17,016 flying hours, including 516 hours on the Airbus A330. The first officer is 42 years old Tarek Musa Abu. He has 4,216 flying hours, including 516 hours on the Airbus A330. The relief first officer is 37-year-old Nazim Al-Mabruk with 1,866 flying hours. Just before 6 o'clock the following morning, the aircraft approaches Tripoli International Airport. At 5:18 am, as Flight 771 approaches its destination, the captain contacts the air traffic controller in Tripoli. The ATC controller clears the flight direct to Tripoli for a Tango Whiskey locator approach to runway 09. The ATC controller reports the weather to Flight 771 as wind calm, visibility 6 km, clear sky, temperature 19 degrees and dew point 17 degrees. The ATC controller also clears the flight to descend. The landing runway of Tripoli International runs west to east and air traffic control directs Flight 771 for a landing in an easterly direction on runway 09. At this end of the runway, only non-precision approaches can be made. This means the aircraft's instruments assist the pilot to get lined up with the runway, but the landing itself has to be performed manually. However, Tripoli is Afriqiyah's home base, so the pilots are well acquainted with the airfield. At 5:59 am, Afriqiyah Airways Flight 771 is transferred from approach control to control tower. Tripoli Tower notifies the aircraft to continue the approach and to report the runway in sight. The approach to runway 09 is guided by some radio beacons for position reference. The beacon Tango Whiskey at 4 nautical miles from the threshold is the final approach fix where the descent to the runway must start. The cockpit voice recordings reveal that no firm procedure for landing was established. En route to Tango Whiskey, the captain and co-pilot discuss whether they will fly the approach managed by the computer or following a selected glide path. The landing procedure should have been long chosen by this stage. Initially, the first officer sets a managed landing. Over the radio, a pilot who has just landed at Tripoli as Flight 721 calls to warn the captain about limited visibility due to low clouds layers at short final. The first officer selects the 3-degree glide path and subsequently disables the managed descent. The selected glide path should have started at Tango Whiskey, but he activates it immediately more than 1 mile short. Therefore, the aircraft descends too early and is on a course to reach the ground well before the runway threshold. The other 2 pilots in the flight deck don't notice this mistake. At 6 am, the flight passes the Tango Whiskey beacon at an altitude of 1,000 feet. 200 feet below the prescribed altitude. At Tango Whiskey, no one in the cockpit notices that the aircraft is too low. As a matter of fact, the very same cockpit crew of the same aircraft had a similar incident a few weeks earlier where they also descended to runway 09 soon and had to abort the approach. This incident was not reported by the crew and not noted by Afriqiyah Airways. The first officer is the pilot flying while the captain is the pilot monitoring. At 720 feet, the aircraft is approaching the decision altitude.
100 above.
This marks the point in the procedure where the runway should be in sight and the crew has to decide whether to continue the approach or abort.
500.
As the aircraft descends more than 1 nautical mile short, they don't see the runway. Nonetheless, the captain commands to continue. The first officer does not abort the approach. At an altitude of 280 feet, a ground proximity warning sounds.
Too low, terrain.
This time, the first officer decides to go around. He adds full power, pulls the nose and lifts the landing gear. The aircraft begins to climb, reaching an altitude of 450 feet above ground level. Then, the co-pilot lowers the nose a bit and the aircraft starts descending again. At this point, the captain takes full control. First, he lifts the nose a bit. But then, he pushes the controls forward. A few seconds later, the aircraft hits the ground at high speed.